Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, it's Danny Lozano with the Brunette Edit podcast.
Hi, welcome back to my podcast, The Brunette Edit. So today we're going to be talking about grief. This episode is specifically for people who've had to grieve quietly or grieve from the sidelines, who've lost somebody they loved but weren't really maybe allowed to break down, or maybe they felt like it was inappropriate to grieve publicly based on their relationship with the person, who felt like their pain didn't really fit into a box. Maybe the person wasn't an immediate family member. Maybe it was a cousin or an aunt or an uncle or somebody who just didn't really fit a standard immediate relationship. I've been there more than once in my life. In fact, I've been there more times than I probably would like to have been. And so I'm going to deep dive into that today. So in 2001, my cousin was murdered. And I was in high school. I'll remember this. I'll never forget this. I remember the last time that I saw him. It was actually the first day of school, my freshman year. And I walked up to this quad of tables. I'm in California, so lunchtime is outside. And he was sitting there with a group of girls. And I was walking past him and he came up to me. And I probably would have ignored him just because he didn't want to be seen with his freshman cousin. But he came up to me and immediately these girls gave me the worst side eye. Like, who is this person? Why is he going up to them? And he gave me a big hug, which I was shocked about because my other cousin had given me all of these horror stories about starting high school. And so it just felt really welcoming and comforting. And I was so happy to have seen him that day. And that was the last time I saw him. Without getting into details, he was murdered tragically. And it was something that rocked our whole family. I mean, it rocked a lot of people. When he passed away, I'll never forget the line of cars in the funeral procession going to the cemetery. And it just felt so surreal. There were only a couple moments when it was happening that it really hit me. It felt like reality. For every other part of it, I was in like a derealization where it felt like a dream. It didn't feel real. And that's how I've continued in my grief for him, is where I'm not really accepting of the reality of it, where it's just kind of felt like he's been away and I know he's not coming back, but he's not gone forever. And maybe that's how my brain processes it and copes with it. But I think for that kind of grief, it was just, I don't know, like I can't say if my brain was protecting itself or if I just felt like it was a weird place to be because he was my cousin and he's part of my family and I loved him, but we weren't really that close. He was 5 years older than me and it was just, it's an odd place to be. And when you're an adolescent too, I would even say with siblings, if you have a sibling that's 4 or 5 years older than you generally don't have this really close relationship with them. You're kind of living different lives. So that was kind of my first touch of grief that was adjacent, where I was really from the sidelines. And we all grieved really deeply for a long time. Even to this day, we bring him up and we talk about him and everybody gets sad and it's still hard to talk about. I think it was also my first experience with public grief, where his story was publicized throughout the state of California. And I remember sitting in class, and at this time, I'm a millennial, so at this time, they would have passed out newspapers for you to read in homeroom. And I'm sitting in my homeroom class, and everybody opens newspapers, and his face is in the newspaper. And I was so angry because I felt violated. Like I wanted to protect my family and I couldn't do that. And so it was just such a weird place to be. And I remember telling my best friend at the time, like, how I felt. And she's like, yeah, I remember you were so mad. But she couldn't understand that it was just the way I was channeling my grief because I didn't know how to deal with it at the time at 15 years old. And so, unfortunately, my family's gone through a lot of grief in my life. I had an aunt who passed away tragically. She was actually a cousin who was really a lot older than me, but in my family, I knew her as my aunt. And she was pretty young when she passed away, also tragically. And you go through where it was kind of the same thing. I think it's different though. In that moment, you accept that they're not coming back. It's different circumstances. It's still tragic, but it just goes to show that you can never say how you're going to process a grief moment or somebody's passing. I think the hardest part is when they're not your parent or your sibling or child or somebody in an immediate relationship with you, that sometimes it's confusing on like, how do I grieve? How do I feel? Like, what's appropriate to feel publicly? Is it okay for me to grieve at all? Like, is it okay for me to be vocal about my pain? Should I do it in private? And I haven't ever really heard anybody talk about being on the sidelines of grief, because you hear about like, yeah, I lost my mom and I lost my husband or I lost my child. And those are all terrible, terrible things. I'm not minimizing that aspect of grief. It's just different. And I can't speak to it because I've never gone through something like that. I lost my grandfather when I was young, and that was very impactful for me. And I still really hard for me to talk about and deal with. But I think the hardest part too is like when these people are not in your everyday life, the shock of the loss is like, I just saw them. Like I just saw them, or the last time I saw them, they were fine. And now you're telling me I'm never going to see them again. And so what kind of sparked this conversation for me was my cousin passed away last May. He was taken from us. He was murdered tragically. And the night before he passed away, I had seen him. We were having a family barbecue, and I literally saw him hours before he was gone forever. And in my mind, I keep replaying that, like, what should I have done differently? Like, what should I have said differently? Like, should I have had hugged him a little bit longer and talked to him a little bit longer? And I remember when I was leaving to go home that night, he was in the front yard talking to one of his friends. And I was going to walk past him because I didn't want to interrupt his conversation. And he stopped me and gave me a hug and said goodbye to me. And I will be forever grateful that he did that. But it doesn't minimize the shock, because now you're dealing with that immediate like shock of the grief. And then he was also a public figure. So he was a fitness influencer. And I have a lot of opinions that I'm not going to talk about in this episode. I don't know if I'll ever talk about them publicly again, but about how the announcement of his passing was handled. I think that our family went through a lot of unnecessary grief because of social media. I think people also showed a lot of love. And, I know for me personally, I'm grateful for that. It was really great to see how he inspired people and people loved him, and, how in shock they were as well. But I also have opinions on like parasocial relationships, but that's not what this podcast is about today. But I think for me too, it's also like, how do you keep them alive? Like, how do you make sure, especially when these tragedies happen, how do you make sure people don't forget who they are? My cousin that was taken from us in 2001, I still Google his name to see if the articles come up. Like, I still want him to be remembered. And I think with grief, what a lot of people want to do is submit to the pain and never think about it again. And I'm just not that kind of person. Like, I want to remember them. I want to talk about them, even though it hurts. And every situation is different. For example, my cousin, when I was in high school, I didn't visit him at the cemetery. It was way too hard for me. It was only in the last 2 years that I've been able to go and take flowers to him on my own. I remember when he first passed, my mom really wanted to go with me. And I would tell her, no, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go to the cemetery. And she'd be like, come on, I'll go with you. And like, I'm like, I don't want to go and be vulnerable in front of you, but I don't want to be vulnerable at all. Like, I don't want to go into that place of grief. And, you know, when my grandpa died, I was young, but that grief was different because it was so immediate and it felt so painful. And I could grieve because that was my grandfather. Like, that was expected. That pain is normal. But when you have these other relationships, there's really no guidebook. There's nobody like saying, oh, it's okay to cry over them, you know, at the end of the night and cry yourself to sleep, you know, and because then I think in a way, and this may just be my perspective, but I think in a way it also feels a little bit dramatic, you know, because you know how much pain their immediate families are going through, their siblings and their parents and their children, if they had them, you know, and so it's almost like if you grieve out loud, that it's almost attention seeking. And I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying that is almost how I feel. And that's the only way I can kind of convey what that feeling is. This is also known as like disenfranchised grief, which is a term that people use to describe this kind of grief that's not openly acknowledged or publicly mourned or socially supported. Because, like, I'm going to give you an example of this. So when my grandfather passed away, this memory is like burned into my mind, and I'll bring it up every once in a while. And it makes me laugh because in the moment I didn't know what the hell was happening. Like, I was a smart kid, but when you're experiencing something like this for the first time, you kind of don't really know what to think about it. But we were at my grandfather's funeral. We were all getting ready to, we were at the outside service where they're going to, you know, bury his casket. And my great aunt came over and she threw herself on the casket and she's like wailing. And obviously that's her brother, so I can understand the grief. But at the same time, I don't understand it because I don't remember like them being that close, but that's just my perspective. I'm only speaking from my perspective. But it was just very odd to see because that's something that you could also say is disenfranchised grief. Like, it's somebody that is, I wouldn't think it maybe was socially acceptable to do that, but she felt it was socially acceptable. And, you know, in the moment, that's what happened. You can't change it. But I'm not really, who am I? Who makes me the authority on how people grieve, you know? And I think that this happens when you yourself figure that a loss is not recognized as significant to you, but to other people, or when your relationship to the deceased is not considered important or warranted to have public grieving. And so it could just be seen by others as like, why are you behaving this way? Why are you grieving this way? And I think grief alone by itself is already such a hard thing to process that having disenfranchised grief can also make it more difficult to process because those feelings are there. It's just, how do I express them? Because my relationship with this person was different. So this kind of grief can feel like, it can make you feel invisible. You can feel strange because you don't want to make it about you. Like I said, like there's something about it that almost makes me feel like it could be perceived as attention seeking when I'm really not doing that. I'm just trying to grieve in my own way. Feeling like you should be okay, but you're really not because you're grieving. The guilt of grieving when other people have it worse. So like for my cousins, they all had sisters. And I know for each situation, it's like, well, I don't want to grieve because I know they have sisters. And is it wrong for me to grieve as much as them? Or besides, you just kind of feel confused as like, how do I express this without making it about me? And then you have to remember grief is not linear. Like, grief can last years and years, and it can last forever. There's nobody saying that your timeline has to fit a specific pattern. You can go in and out of grief. You go through the stages of grief. It can hit you at different times. There can be different triggers. And so I think it's important to understand that you are going to feel those things, even if you had a grief where you're kind of looking at it from the sidelines or it's disenfranchised. It's still something that you have to process and go through. Nobody can be the authority and say, well, you're not able to do that. Like, you are not allowed to grieve that person, because honestly, who is the sheriff of grieving? Like, who gets to come in and say you're doing it wrong or you're doing it right? Like, nobody can do that, because grief is different for everybody and every situation is different. I think for me, what's helped is putting it in my mind that, well, for one, I don't care what you think about me. If I'm going to grieve somebody, I know other people are grieving that person. I know that they were well loved, and I'm only coming from a place of love. So if you think that my feelings are disingenuous or attention seeking, then I feel like that's a projection of you, because that's not where I'm coming from. And I had to really put it out of my mind that I know that I'm coming from a good place. I know that I'm being genuine. And I know that the reasons I'm doing it is for me to process the grief, but also to keep their name alive. Like I talked about before, is I think, and this is just my opinion, only my opinion, I think when somebody passes, and I'm not saying this is wrong or right, I'm just saying my perspective. When somebody passes away and then you grieve in a way that you put them out of your mind completely as if they never existed, doesn't allow their soul to be electrified in the afterlife. Whatever that may be, heaven, purgatory, another dimension, like whatever your belief is on where your soul goes, or maybe you don't believe that. But if you're not keeping their name alive, then I just feel like it does something to that soul in the afterlife. I don't know what it is, but I almost feel like you have to keep thinking of them, and you have to have memories of them that are going through your mind constantly, or at least, sporadically, to keep that memory alive until you can be together again, or you can meet again, if that's your belief and that's my belief. But just something doesn't sit right with me about just pretending they never existed. And I know everybody handles grief differently. I'm not saying it's wrong, because sometimes that's how people cope, and that is the only way they can cope. And I'm not judging them. I'm not saying that's wrong. I think for me, that is why I am, will bring up stories about them or talk about them or want to engage in conversations about them. I think also finding people you can talk to about it. Like for me, I have different people for different grief situations I can talk to. For my cousin that passed away when I was in high school, I can talk to my older cousin who was his age. I can talk to people in my immediate family about it. And, when I find the strength, I can go and sit at the cemetery and talk to him in spirit. And that's just my belief of what I do. I mean, I'm not saying he talks back to me. I'm just saying, there is, I think it's like a religious and a spiritual thing. And I think I'm not the only one that does it, but just finding your safe space, with my cousin that passed away recently, I can talk to my aunt about it and I can talk to his sister about it, and people that are safe for you just in life and safe to have those conversations with, but really to share those experiences of grief with them and be able to talk about it openly without feeling like you're being judged. Even if they themselves had a different relationship, it really is just going to be dependent on what your connection and relationship to that person is. I think therapy, like I'm already in therapy as it is. So, if I'm having a bad week or something where I feel like I need to talk about this or I need to talk about my grief, I can talk about that. You can journal, whatever is an outlet for you. Sometimes people do painting and like knitting and things like that, like whatever your outlet is for grief. For a long time, I used to like to go on drives by myself. I would drive up the coast into Malibu, and sometimes I would drive into the mountains, and it would really just for me to be alone with my thoughts. And if I needed to cry, I would cry and do whatever I needed to do for myself. And then I'd just go back to my normal life when it was over. And so something that you can do that helps you channel and your grief. And that's not to say that you're going to always heal from your grief. I mean, grief is painful. Grief for me, it feels the same today as it did 24 years ago. It feels the same for me as it did, almost 30 years ago when my grandfather passed away. And so it's really just dependent on the situation and how you handle grief. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. And I think if people want to judge you for how you handle it, there's something inherently wrong with them. They just feel a need to pick at you. And I think self-reflection is in order if that is the kind of person they are, but that's just my opinion. I would say that if you've ever felt like you didn't quote unquote earn your grief, I want to let you know that you did. Whatever your relationship with that person was is meaningful. It had depth. That person was part of your life in some capacity. It's not somebody that you just knew in passing. It's not somebody that you only met once. I mean, these are people that are still part of your life or your family, and it could be even a coworker or somebody you've gone to school with. And they made a lasting impression on your life. And for whatever reason that may be, you have a right to feel those feelings of grief and to go through the stages of what grieving looks like. And there's no right way or wrong way. I think it's just a little bit harder to be so publicly open about it when you aren't directly connected to them. But again, my opinion is like, who gives a shit at the end of the day? Like, to me, if you really want to lay it out, like, I had a relationship with this person, whether it was family, friends, professional, they're not coming back. It's really impacted me. I'm feeling pain. I want to cry. I want to hurt. Who gives a fuck what anybody else thinks about it? Like, who cares? And if people want to gatekeep grief, then I think there's something wrong with them, not with you. And you can grieve everybody differently. You don't have to do the same rituals and the same types of healing. And you can choose to grieve one person thoroughly and not even acknowledge the grief of another person. And it really is just dependent on what path you want to take for expressing what that pain feels like for you. And I just don't think that for people to come and say, well, you can't grieve somebody because you weren't their sister or their mother. It's like, yes, I can. Like, they were my family, or for me, it was my family, And I'm not like hopping at funerals to like pick up guys or being a weirdo just showing up to funerals. Like, these are people that made lasting impacts in my life, and they really were part of my life. And I was not the only one impacted by it. And it's okay to feel those feelings and feel that grief. And I mean, I even had at some point, I had lost my dog. She was 14 years old. And I loved her so much. And I was so broken when she died. I mean, so broken. And there are times I think about her now and I want to cry because I miss her. Like, it's just sad. Like, dogs are important parts of your family. And if anybody were to tell me, oh my God, you're crying over a dog, I'd be like, yes, I'm crying over a fucking dog. Like, that's none of your business. Like, I could feel sad for things. Like, I'm human. And also for me in particular, I'm a highly sensitive person. I already feel things amplified times 15 or 20. Like, everything to me is extra. And some people don't understand that. I don't expect them to. It's my own responsibility to navigate through that as what I feel is appropriate. And the good thing about grief is there really is no social norm. We have westernized norms to grief and mourning, but like there really is no wrong way or right way, right? As long as you're not being a weirdo. Like, there's no handbook of grief or how to handle death. You just do what the best thing is for you. And you can see through how people grieve, whether you've passed away from cancer or murdered or a car accident or some type of health condition. Everybody grieves so differently. I mean, even when I've seen children pass away from like cancer and their families are like, do not wear black to their funeral. Do not wear black. Wear hot pink and yellow and celebrate their life. And there may be other people that are like, no, like you need to show up and traditionally mourn for this person. And so I just think that if you're ever feeling that your grief isn't warranted or you don't have the right to feel what you're feeling, I would put those feelings aside because there is no right way to grieve. Love is love and loss is loss. And it's part of the human experience. We're all going to die one day, just like we were all born one day, and that was a happy experience. I think mourning is a part of life, and the more that you understand that and are prepared for the act itself, then you are experiencing life like a normal human being. You know what I mean? And I say normal very loosely because really what is normal? But I just think if you're going through that type of grief where maybe it was your cousin or your aunt or, you know, an uncle or a great grandparent or somebody who really wasn't like super, super close to you, you are not alone, you know. And the thing about grief is though, you may not know exactly what somebody is going through or feel exactly what somebody is feeling because everybody's experience is different. And every experience is different depending on the person who's passed away. But those feelings are all shared. I can be sad and I can know that somebody else that lost somebody is sad. And I know what sadness feels like. I know what anger feels like because there are deaths that are untimely and unjust. And if somebody else lost a family member that way, I know that they know what that feels like. And so there is a relatable experience that we all have when we go through grief. And I think as long as you keep it in your mind that you love that person and you are not really trying to attention seek or put yourself on a grief pedestal or, you know, shine the light on yourself to make it seem like you're the most grief stricken above everybody else, then your grief journey is normal. Who cares what anybody else thinks? And kind of what sparked this for me was a couple months ago, I'd say like 2 months now. You know, for me with grief, I'm a social media person. When I am feeling something, I post about it. And sometimes when I'm not feeling anything, I post about it. Like, you can't really tell the kind of person I am from what I post because I just be posting everything. But when my cousin passed away that day, I posted on TikTok. Well, I didn't know my video was going to go viral. I was posting for myself, for my feelings. And I'm sure some people can look at that and think, oh my God, like, she's doing it for likes. That's not true. I'm doing it because that's how I'm channeling my emotions, because in the moment I'm thinking about him, and I don't want people to forget him. I want people to remember who he was and the legacy he had. So there are times since he's passed away that I post him, and I have to, like, again, put it in the back of my mind that I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. But once in a while I'll get a comment of like, you're still talking about him? And my response to that is like to post another video about him, because yes, I'm still talking about him. I'm still going to talk about him. If you don't like it, then you don't have to look. It's really that simple. But I think social media has made, people fearless because they can hide behind their keyboards and type their little comments, and there's no social repercussions for it. And they can say what they would say behind a computer or a phone that they would never tell somebody in public. And however you deal with something like that, for me, it's like, okay, I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. Like, if you don't like it, then don't follow me. If you don't like it, then don't like it. Keep scrolling. That is what helps me grieve. And I know that I'm coming from a good place. If you think that I'm not coming from a good place and you don't like it, then block me. I don't know what to tell you. But I think people need to remember that everybody has their own grief experience, and something that I may think somebody's doing that I think is weird, that is what is helpful for their experience. I shouldn't quickly discount that as like strange, because that is what makes them feel better. And so I just want people to know that, you're not alone, and grief is such a universal experience and nobody deals with it the same. I would say if you have a story about grief or something that you'd want to share on my podcast, you can share it with me. You can send me an email. You can DM me. I'm on all social media at the Brunette Edit Podcast. You can also email me at thebrunetteedit@outlook.com. I would love to hear your stories. At the end of the day, what I hope people take from this is compassion and understanding, and also consideration that grief is not the same for everybody, that we are all going to experience things differently, and respecting that is really important, because even if you don't understand, you still should respect how other people handle grief. So that's it for today. Make sure to follow me on social media. You can like my podcast, make sure to subscribe, share, and rate it if you can. I would really appreciate that. So until next time, thank you.